Okay, Ethan, I'm
Hello.
so excited. We have our first cyclist on the 8th Lane podcast today. Do you want to give our listeners a brief description of who you are, what you do?
Yeah, totally. My name is Ethan Belot, born and raised in Orem, Utah. I'm a graphic designer by day, and I would say amateur cyclist by night. But yeah, I've been officially cycling for the last year or so. Before that, I had a fixed gear bike where I would just cruise around downtown and I don't know, be a bit of a menace, bomb hills. But this last year was my first time getting a true road bike and really getting into it. And so I'm a crit racer, which we'll get into what that is. But
Yes.
Yeah, road cyclist.
So I want to get into how you got into road cycling, what made you switch from just a hobby cyclist to you're actually really good at crit cycling. So maybe though, for our listeners who don't know what crit cycling is, give us an overview. What is it? Why is it different from just road biking? Yeah.
Yeah. Crit is really interesting. It's short for criterium. And basically it's just like a circuit race is the easiest way to describe it. Every course is a little bit different. They often happen in downtown city centers, around business parks, wherever they can get the road closed down, basically. Typically laps are around a mile or a little less than a mile long. So they're really, really short laps. And we go for a specific amount of time. So depending on if it's a local race or a national level race, that can be anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half.
Okay.
And, we're averaging anywhere from 25, 26 miles an hour to upwards of 30 miles an hour in the race for about an hour, which if you've ridden a bike,
fast,
you know how fast that is.
Also, all the turns.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah. So there's a lot of turns. It kind of depends on the course again. But you have your traditional, just 4-corner crit.
Okay.
Which, makes sense.
Yeah.
But then you'll have L-shaped crits. You'll have some that have weird chicanes in it, which for anybody who doesn't know what a chicane is, it's basically when the road kind of bends to the side and then comes around. So it creates almost this S curve. So it's two really tight corners right next to each other. And so you can have anywhere from 4 corners to upwards of sometimes 8. There's some crits where you're just turning the whole time and they're really technical. And so
that's crazy.
Yeah, those are the ones that are a little bit slower, but honestly a little more scary because you're really just dipping it into the corner all the time. So
yeah, that's nuts. With the peloton on a crit, on longer cycling races, the peloton can be 10 minutes ahead of everyone else. But for something like a mile looped course, how far is that head peloton from the rest of the pack? Or is there one? I don't even.
Yeah. So I guess maybe we should explain what peloton is.
Yeah, let's explain what peloton is.
Yeah. So peloton is basically just a fancy word for the group. So in crit racing and road racing, they're mass start events, which means there's 40 to 100 plus people on course at a time, which for a road race, typically they're obviously just going on country roads or whatever, so they're a little bit wider. But with crit races, sometimes you're confined to one lane or a lane and a half, and so you can have 100 people at a time riding together in a lane and a half. And so when it comes to breaking away from that field, the courses are so tight and the corners are so sharp that typically people can't really get away that far. And so the gaps, a big gap is maybe a minute, which is basically a whole lap at that point. And so people are only, 30 seconds is kind of a long gap. And that closes down really, really fast because the whole peloton is working together to try and get ahead. And also if you get dropped, then they just pull you from the race. So if you can't keep up, then you're just pulled. And so you don't typically see that same peloton break that you'll see in road racing where you'll have one lead guy, another guy chasing a smaller group and then a big group. It's usually just the big group and a couple guys, or the big group and a decent sized group of 6 guys riding together. And so yeah, it's really dynamic. Things get brought back really, really fast. And so you'll, be up the road thinking you have a good gap, and next thing you know, you turn around and everybody's on you again.
That's crazy. So really, it's if you're still in the race,
Mhm.
it's anybody's race.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Totally.
So I was looking online just at the results from some crit races locally last year, and there were a lot of like DNFs on there.
Mhm.
Is that when you get pulled from the race because you're not keeping up with the
Yeah.
peloton?
Yeah.
Okay.
So either getting pulled or crashes.
Yeah.
I mean, crashes are really big in crit racing. It's kind of a part of crit racing.
Mm.
Again, the courses are so tight. You're going so fast. It's really easy to just send yourself into a barrier.
Oh my
And so there's a lot of people that crash out. But then, the other DNFs that you'll see is they get dropped and they just can't hold on to the peloton. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So strategy in
Mhm.
a crit race. When you go into a crit race, what is like the standard strategy to win?
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I'm sure it's different than
Yeah,
road
totally.
racing.
Yeah. So it varies on the course, it varies on your strengths, and it varies on kind of what role you play
Okay.
in your team. I think a big thing to note is that when it comes to cycling, drafting is really big. And basically, like the physics of drafting is that if somebody's in front of you and you're behind them, they're actually breaking the wind as you're riding. And so it's easier for you. And so one of the measurements that we use in cycling is wattage, watts. And if you're behind somebody and you're drafting off of them, you're actually using less watts to go the same speed. And so, like you could be putting down an average of 300 watts and the person behind you could only be doing 280 watts to go the exact same speed. And so a lot of strategy kind of depends on like, am I a solo rider? Do I have a team? How many people are on my team? What are their strengths? What are my strengths? And also knowing your competition too. And then knowing the features of the course. So typically there's places in a course where you can move up without having to use too much energy, whether that's a downhill or a really fast corner. And if you can take that corner properly, you can move up in wheels, you can move back in wheels without having to actually use too much energy. And so coming into a race, I usually like to look at what are the features of the course? How long is it? What am I really good at? I'm a sprinter, so I'm really good at like punchy things and also really hard finishes, whether they're like uphill finishes, because I can put down a lot of power. And so a lot of the strategy is just kind of like course dependent, and seeing where I can play to my strengths as, I guess, a bigger guy and a more powerful guy. Like where can I actually use those strengths like for my better?
That's cool. So almost as you're racing the course, you're saying, okay, like in the latter end of the race, this is where I'm going to push and this is where I'm going to try to get ahead kind of thing.
Yeah, totally.
That's cool.
And also seeing just like how people are racing. In some races, people get really eager and they just like want to go for it. And so you're like, okay, I'll just sit back and let you do that. But then there's other races where people are a little more passive. And so it's like, how can you kind of play the game? Sometimes that means you just have to attack the field and kind of roll off the front a little bit to make people chase you down. There were a couple times last year where I did that. I would just kind of we call it a flyer. It's just when you fly it. Yeah, you fly across. And so, I'd come back from like a, 10, 15 wheels back and just come with a lot of speed past the peloton. And it was basically just to speed them up because they see me rolling off the front. They don't want me to just stay out there. And so they'll typically work a little bit harder. And so, yeah, you can kind of see like how people are racing, and that will really decide how the outcome is going to be.
So in that same vein, probably if you have a good fast group of people, you're all going to be able to push your limits a little bit better than you would if it were like, I don't know, a less fast group of people.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes again, like even with the passive riding nature, like last year at Salt Lake Crit, the first day everybody was riding really passively. Nobody really wanted to make moves. I knew who was in that race and who would make some moves, so I just watched them. Okay. And, there was a group of 3 guys that I had my eye on, and as soon as they went off the front, I knew that I had to attack, and so I closed down that gap and I stayed with them and the chasing group just wasn't motivated to catch us, and so we stayed away for a while, all the way up until the end. And so it really just kind of depends on the composition of the field, which I think is really cool and really dynamic. Like there's a lot of sports where people will just kind of go all out, and they're just going all out the whole time. But one way that I've heard crit racing described is that it's chess at 30 miles an hour, and that's really what it is. There's a lot of plays, and there's a lot of like being able to compose yourself while your heart rate is peaking for an hour, and like what you're going to decide to do.
That's insane. Like the amount of concentration though, like my sport from your sport, like they couldn't be more different. Like I'm like running for like hours and hours. It's so chill. But something like crit racing, from the videos that I've seen, kind of from what you've said, is like pure concentration and adrenaline for like 45 minutes to an hour and a half. You said it's the longest?
Yeah, something
that's insane there. So what like mental strategies are you using to like keep yourself focused, or does it come so naturally because you're in it, you know?
I mean, I think that my background has a lot to do with that. Like growing up in the sports that I played, I was really into football. And I think that playing football and playing all the positions that I played, because I played basically every position on the field, you start to learn how to like be okay with the chaos and how to compose yourself when there's a lot going on, when you're really tired, and especially in football, you don't want to get hit. And so you're like, what can I do to like not get hit while I'm tired, while I'm thinking about what everybody else is doing? And so I think that like a lot of racing strategy kind of came naturally to me because of that background, and like just understanding how to compose myself when it gets really hard. Because there is a lot of strategy involved. Like, it's a very physical thing. But there's a lot of people who are stronger than me, like honestly, who just can't race as well because they're not thinking about it. They're just trying to use their strength to win. And, I have like a decent amount of strength, but I think that I can compose myself, and I know, how to save that and use it when I need.
So I think to give our listeners kind of an idea for your first year of racing, which was 2023, first I want you to explain what the CAT levels are. So maybe dive into that, and then I want to talk about your first year of racing.
Yeah, totally. So CAT is short for category. There's a lot of jargon in cycling that just is more complicated than it has to be.
It's like a barrier of entry, honestly.
Yeah, no, totally. It's a really, I don't know, there's a lot of things in cycling that have that like barrier of entry. I mean, there's like price, there's jargon, there's, everything else with
kind
it.
of attitude too. Like a lot of cyclists that I speak with, they're like so secretive almost.
It's a very elitist thing. And that's kind of how I looked at it for a while too. And, especially like being a person of color, I'm like, I don't see anybody that looks like me doing this. And so it's just like, I don't know, it's a very interesting thing. And I kind of went for it because I did see a couple people who looked like me, and I was like, if they can do it, I can do it, kind of a thing. But there is this really big barrier of entry that I think is being pulled down, but it's still definitely there. And I don't know, the elitist nature of it is very interesting. I work in Draper, Utah, and so there's like a ton of cyclists there. And I have some clients who like will try to get in with their friends or just business people they work with. And they're like, the hardest part isn't buying the $20,000 bike. It's like finding someone who's gonna help me, basically. No, totally. Like you kind of feel alone. And I was really fortunate in my first year to be able to find a group of people who like really supported me. And I found a team that I really fit in with. But like that also took hours of me just like scouring the internet to figure out like what even was going on with cycling, how it worked, like what did I need to do, how do group dynamics work. Like there's so much involved with it. And I think that like my ADHD brain really liked that, because I was just like,
I can do 8 things
like
at
I
once.
can figure out all this stuff, and like I get very obsessed with things, and so it was easy for me to like sit there and spend the time to look it up. But like there's not a lot of resources for people to figure out like how to get into it.
Yeah.
So
who were those people that you saw that you were like, wow, if they can do it, maybe I can do it type of thing? And what were those moments in sport, I guess, that you saw?
Yeah. So the main one is Justin Williams.
Okay.
He is based out of LA.
Okay.
And he runs a team, actually a couple teams. So he has a team called Legion of Los Angeles, team called Miami Blazers, and one called Austin Outlaws. They just rebranded from Aviators to Outlaws this year. And they're all crit teams. And so my introduction to cycling, outside of just seeing like, you know, the rich dentist riding down the road, was these videos of Justin Williams, who's this black guy who is, you know, national track champion, and he's killing it in crits. And, you know, he has this really cool team, and they have like graffiti on their bikes and wild colors, and like it was just very different from what I had imagined cycling was before that. And yeah, I kind of just went down like a rabbit hole of watching videos of him and kind of all of his buddies. There's, you know, Dante Young, his brother Corey also rides, and, you know, they have this really cool group of like ethnic people, I guess. Like, you know, they have people from the Caribbean, and yeah, I don't know. It was like seeing those videos of them riding and learning what crit racing was, and seeing kind of the chaos and seeing how they handle it, I think was really cool. And like, he was definitely, I would say, in cycling, a role model for me. Because before that, again, it's like on the outside looking in to cycling, all you know is Lance Armstrong, and you know the Tour, and like that's it. Like
maybe like some skinny white guy from your neighborhood or something.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, I know Dave on the corner like rides his bike around, and I see him, and it's like, and so it's very underground in that nature. But yeah, like seeing Justin, seeing the way that he expressed himself, I don't know, I really connected with it. You know, he's again this like person of color in a sea of white people racing in crits, which I didn't even know what they were at the time. And all I know is I'm seeing him in the last 200 meters of a race, sprinting his heart out, and then like standing up and throwing his arms up, or he's like dabbing across the finish line, and he's got this gold chain hanging out, and like,
okay, wait, I actually think I've seen like videos of him. Yeah. Now that you like describe his celebration, for sure I've seen him on Instagram.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. No, he's like, I would say he's a staple in the crit community. A lot of people like to hate on him because he's different, and that's just what people like to do when somebody's different. They like to hate a little bit. But like, I think that he's done a lot for the sport. I think he's brought a lot of people in, and he's you know, creating a pathway for people who don't really have access to it to gain access to it. And, you know, especially with something like crit, it really takes like a small area for like the ability to have a race course. And so you can make that more accessible to people who can't go and travel and do these long road races, and they don't have the support vehicles and all of that. And there's like that big money barrier. But it's like with crit racing, you can kind of go with like a cheap bike and still be able to perform really well, because it's such a dynamic thing. And it's not just who can afford the aero carbon bike and the nicest stuff, and, you know, be able to have a team with support vehicles and extra parts and whatever. And it's like, I don't know, it's really cool.
So did you like learn all of this before being like, okay, I want to try it? Or did you kind of just see videos and think, I'm going to give this a try? And then as you were trying it, you found that, hey, like my sprinting background really lends to this crit thing. Like, I'm actually kind of good at this, and I can really focus on the strategy of this.
Yeah.
How did it work?
I learned about it before I got into it. Yeah. I mean, this was back probably like 2017.
Also a long time
ago. I learned about it, and even more backstory, my introduction to crit racing was actually fixed gear crit racing. So for those that don't know what a fixed gear is, it's basically just a single speed bike, so you can't change gears. And the cog on the back is actually fixed to the wheel. And so if the wheel is turning, your feet have to be turning. The only way to slow down is very similar to like running, where you have to actually like kind of slow your legs down and almost backpedal to actually stop the bike.
Oh, that's so
and
strange.
So it's this really weird sensation. And if you've seen like track cycling, that's an Olympic sport, where they go around like the wooden track. They're actually on fixed gear bikes. And so they have one gear. It's really, really big. It's hard to move. And they can't coast on it.
How does that work with crit racing though? I feel like around those corners you have to.
Yeah, no, exactly. This is why I like fell in love with it, because it was this thing that just didn't make sense. It was like, and you have no brakes too. Your feet are your brakes. And so like I saw these videos. There used to be this crit series called the Red Hook Crit. And it started off with this guy in New York who had a bunch of like bike messenger buddies. And if you know about the bike messenger scene, they all ride fixed gears. It's kind of like the big thing. You get a fixed gear and you cruise around town and you almost get hit by cars and all of the fun in it is just like near misses. And so I kind of like saw videos of that and I was like, this looks really fun. Like the adrenaline junkie in me was like, this seems really fun. And then that kind of leaned into the fixed gear crit scene. And so this guy who had all of these buddies who were bike messengers, for his birthday one year, they did a race. They didn't close anything off. They were just like, hey, let's like find this block in New York and let's have a race. And it was basically just like a crit race that they did for his birthday. And they did that for like more and more years, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And the bike messenger scene really started to like take hold of it. And so you had all these bike messengers from all over the world coming to New York to race this crit. They started to actually get it like sanctioned, so they had barriers and actually closed off roads so there weren't cars on course. But then you had this like other level of like pros seeing it and being like, this is kind of cool. And it was drawing really big crowds. And so a lot of sponsors thought it was kind of a cool way to like get in with new scenes. And so Justin Williams actually was a part of a team called Specialized Rocket Espresso, and they went and raced Red Hook Crit. And that was like kind of my big introduction to not only crit racing, but Justin, and kind of like what that whole world was like. Because again, they were wearing these like super colorful kits, and they were like, it's like this patchwork color kit. It's really cool. I still want one of the bikes that they had. Like, they're so cool. And so I found those videos of them like doing these fixed gear crits, and I was like, this looks really cool. And then I found out about like geared crits. I was like, oh, this is like actually a bigger thing. And I was kind of like, you know, like punk teenager was like, oh, I'm not going to get a geared bike. I'm just going to stick with the fixed gear thing. And, you know, started getting into fixies, riding fixies downtown, doing the same kind of, I wasn't a bike messenger, but I did the bike messenger thing of like just cruising around town and trying to get near misses. And, you know, after a while realized that I kind of like my life and I want to keep it that way. And so that's where I was like, you know, maybe I should think about this in a different way and, you know, save up some money, get an actual bike and really get into it. So. Yeah.
So that's how crit racing was born for you.
Yeah.
So how long did it take from when you were like, okay, I'm going to save money, I'm going to buy a bike? Because they're expensive. Yeah. And that's like, again, a huge barrier of entry to a lot of people. Was it like that year? Was it the next year? When did you take the plunge?
No, it was a while. So I moved to Salt Lake in 2019, and I was still working in Provo, was making hardly any money. And so I had to take the train down. My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she didn't have a car, so we had one car, so I let her use my car, and I was like, all right, I need to get to the train station every day. So that's when I was like, oh, I remember like a couple years back I saw that whole fixed gear thing. Maybe I should get a fixed gear. And so I got a fixed gear in like 2019. didn't have the money for it, bought it with a firm, like purposely didn't make payments because I didn't even have the money for it until they like were like, yo, we're going to send you to
Like,
collections
yeah.
until you pay for this thing.
Yeah.
And so, you know, did that for a couple of years. And then in like 2021, after a couple of years of riding fixed gear, I ended up selling it just because I wasn't really riding anymore and I didn't have space in my apartment for the bike. And like, I haven't really had a lot of remorse in like selling things or even buying things. Like I'm kind of just like, oh, I'll just like buy it, or oh, I'll just sell it. Like I don't really have a lot of attachment to things, but selling that bike was like a massive regret. Like the second I saw the person walk away with it, I was like, oh, I want that back.
Like, wait, come back.
Yeah. And so for the next, like 2 years year, I was like, I really want a bike back. And so it was like November of 2022. I bought it as kind of like a birthday / Christmas present for myself. I went and bought like an actual road bike. And so then I got a trainer and I started riding indoors and training for the next year. And I honestly kind of got it just to like lose weight because I totally let myself go in that like year time and, you know, put on a bunch of weight. And I was like, you know what, let me just get a bike. Like I'm not motivated to go to the gym. I really like just don't want to do that. I've never been a big gym person unless it's for a sport. It's the only time I've ever really liked the gym. And so I was like, this would be like a really good way to lose weight. And then as I was doing research on what bike to get, I started remembering the crit thing again.
Like, wait.
And I was like, maybe I should try that. And like the competitive nature of me was like, no, like I want to race for sure. And so it was like, what's the best bike I can buy for my budget? And, you know, ended up getting like a Canyon Air Road, which looks really cool and is really fast. And I was like, yeah, like I want to do this. And, so I bought it in like 2022, and then 2023 last year was my first year, like actually really riding, and my first year of racing.
So for our guests to, or not our guests, our listeners to understand like how crazy of a year you had last year.
Yeah.
I want to cycle back to the category question. So there's 5 categories, right?
Yep.
Explain it for us.
Yeah. So you start at a category 5. And you know, most people's goal is to get to category 1.
Which is
pro cycling in the US is very interesting. Cat 1 is kind of where you're at the like quote unquote pro level.
Okay.
Most pros in the US don't really get paid, or they just don't get paid a lot.
In crit racing specifically, or all
even
cycling?
Road racing. Okay. Yeah. There's just not like, it's funny because you look at cycling and you're like, oh, like everybody's having these like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 bikes plus, you know, some are 15. And you're like, oh, like it must just be this really rich sport, and it's not. It's super underfunded in the US especially. And so there's like not really a lot of money in it. And so Cat 1 is kind of just considered like domestic elite is what a lot of people will call it instead of pro. Some people will say pro. It's kind of interchangeable though. Once you get to Cat 1, you're at the pro level. So a lot of like Cat 1 races are considered Pro 1 races. So you'll see P1 for a lot of those races. And so you start at category 5 and you make your way down to category 1 by getting like a certain amount of podiums or just placements in, I think it's like the top 10. You can get points depending on how big the field is. And so the points start at 1 and then they kind of just like go down the line as you're placing like lower on the podium, so like if that makes sense.
0.9, 0.8 type of.
Yeah. So it's like, I think depending on the field size, if you get like first in a race, you'll get like 8 points. And then second is like, you know, 6 or 7 or something like that. And then it's like 4 and then 3, 2, 1 kind of a thing. So that's like how the points work. Again, cycling is like so confusing and complicated for no reason.
Confusing. There are like a million random rules.
Yeah, there's like so many things. And so when it comes to the categories, they're USA cycling sanctioned. And so USA Cycling, like as an association, is the ones who have laid out all of these category rules. And in order to, sometimes we call it catting up or just like upgrade, you have to race in USAC races, USA Cycling. We say USAC for short because that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
And so when you're racing in USAC races, then you can actually get the upgrade points to upgrade. So everybody starts at 5, no matter what. Even if you were like a pro in another sport, you still have to start at 5 technically. And by the end of the year, I made it to Cat 3. And I really only raced like a handful of USAC races. And I actually only raced like a handful of times last year. So like my first race, for instance, was Wattfest, which is really cool. It happens over at the Utah Motorsports Park. And it's kind of similar to a crit in that you're doing laps, but it's like a 2.2 mile loop. So it's a little bit longer than most crits, and the corners are really chill. They're super easy because it's a car race course. And so it's like a fairly easy course, I guess you could say.
Do you feel like that lent to your strengths or not so much?
So I think it would have, but I didn't really understand nutrition.
Okay.
I ended up cramping up in like the last 2 laps and I had to pull out. So I actually DNF'd that race.
That sucks.
Yeah. And so,
Everyone
and it was
has
funny.
to learn the hard way though.
Yeah,
so.
no, totally. I got done with that race. It was actually kind of funny. It was my first time ever riding in a group, which I don't recommend to people to like hop in a race for the first time riding in a group. But I don't know. Apparently I'm crazy and I like to do that. And so it was like my first race ever. I hadn't really met the team. I was like technically part of the team.
Okay.
Which I guess maybe we can explain
the
team real quick. So I ride for LHMCC. It's the Larry H. Miller Cycling Club. Cool. So it was started by the Miller family, and has been run by the Miller family for years and years and years. Zane Miller now runs it, and he's kind of like the younger of the Miller family and put this really cool, like modern spin on the team.
It's cool.
Which is what kind of brought me in, like, again, back to like my background in even learning about cycling and learning about crit. Like I was really pulled to the people who were a little different and did things differently. And like LHMCC was kind of the place where I felt like I would fit in the most. And so I reached out to Zane over Instagram, sent him a DM and was like, hey, I'm new. Honestly, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I come from like this track and field background and, you know, I think I might do well. I really want to do crits. Like, can I join the club? And he was just like, yeah, for sure. Here's the like link to order some kit. And I was like,
cool.
All right, cool. And that was like over the winter. So I didn't really have an opportunity to like ride with anybody.
So you're doing a lot of like trainer work at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was on the indoor trainer.
How does that even translate? Like,
it doesn't.
I guess like cardio, but like,
yeah. No, it's very different. And there's actually kind of this like funny thing that's going on with trainers, and people will call it like Zwift fitness. You'll have these people who are super, super strong and they can't ride a bike. Like their bike handling is terrible. They just don't know what they're doing. And so there actually is this massive disconnect of like, you can be really, really strong and not know how to ride a bike, especially in a crit where you need to have bike handling ability. So, I mean, like it translates in the way where you're building fitness. And so it's good to have like base fitness, but other than that, like being good on the trainer isn't going to help you win a race, kind of a thing. So
sounds like racing is the only thing that's going to help you win a race. Kind of.
Totally. Well, and even back to my first experience with a race, it was like, I needed to go through that to understand what I was actually getting into. Like no amount of videos or tutorials or even just conversations with people can like get you prepared for what a race actually is like. Yeah. You know, I mean, even if you compare like riding in a group, just on a group ride, to a race, or even just like a fast group ride, like it's just so different. Like people are on it from the gun. And if you're not prepared for that, it's pretty jarring. And that was kind of what happened to me. Like we started going and I wasn't really ready for that pace. And because of that, I didn't even touch my bottle. And the big thing is like in your bottle, you know, typically you have electrolytes and carbs to keep you from cramping, to keep you from bonking. I seriously didn't. I don't even think I took a single sip the whole time because I was just like trying not to crash into people, basically.
Yeah, I mean, everyone just like jostling together. Like,
yeah,
I wouldn't reach down for my bottle
and
either.
it was cold and it was windy, and I was like, I just need to keep my hands on the handlebar and like try to keep it rubber side down.
So how long was this one? You said they're all different lengths.
Yeah,
right?
so Wattfest, I'm trying to remember. That was the Cat 4 field. I think we did like, I think it was just under an hour or an hour.
Okay.
So it was definitely on the longer end.
And you're hitting like close to max heart rate.
Yeah.
For
I was
like the whole
I
hour.
mean, I was like freaking out. So I was max heart rate pretty much like 5 minutes in. And so like I remember looking down. That was actually the second that I took off heart rate on my bike computer. So I couldn't even see it because it was just freaking me out even more to like look down and it's color coded and it's red and I'm like, oh
like
man.
flashing.
Yeah.
Stop.
And I like look at the clock and it's 5 minutes in and I know that I have another like 55 minutes to go. And yeah, so it was really, it was an interesting experience to say the least. But again, like you kind of have to get thrown into it to just like understand what it's like.
So at what point in Wattfest, is that what it was called, did you start cramping and have to drop?
I think it was like 2 laps to go. There was a guy off the front. I was still in the peloton. Somebody was chasing. So I ended up bridging up to the person who was chasing, tried to ride with him, and I was pushing really hard. I guess it's also probably good to mention that I didn't have a power meter at the time. So I actually didn't know how much power I was putting out. And this is a big part of bike racing is like understanding pacing, how much power are you putting out, because it's really easy to just like be spiking your power left and right. And then next thing you know, it just catches up to you and you just dip off. And so there was like 2 laps to go. I was trying to chase with this guy and we were, you know, trading turns. So he was drafting off of me, then I was drafting off of him. And I went to take my turn and I started just trying to hit it to try and pull this guy back, which after learning who that guy was that was off the front, that was just a bad idea in general.
You're like,
and yeah, ended up just getting this like mega cramp that like, yeah, it lasted like a week, honestly. I couldn't even walk.
Worst.
Yeah. And so it was like, it kind of sucked because it was right there at the end. But again, it was a good lesson for me. And when I pulled off, one of the guys from the team like grabs my bottle and shakes it. And he's like, did you drink? And I was like, no, I was racing. What do you mean did I drink? Like, he's like, you gotta learn how to drink. And so that was like baptism by fire. I was like, all right, cool. Like, welcome to cycling, I guess.
Yeah, I actually was going to ask you about that because it seems like such an intense race. Like you described it as like a game of chess at 30 miles an hour. How, like, at what point do you reach down? What is the strategy for drinking your water? Is it on the straightaway?
Yeah, it kind of depends, but I would say like a good rule of thumb is whenever there's a lull in the group. Okay. So if somebody goes off the front and the group catches them, I drink right away as soon as we catch.
That's so like, many things to
I'll
juggle.
Look around and be like, okay, is anybody gonna counterattack? If nobody's counterattacking, I'm drinking. You also kind of learn how to like do it at really high pace.
Okay.
And it's something that I actually practice like in my training is like, can I keep pedaling at, you know, a threshold wattage while also drinking? And so it's actually something that you kind of have to train. You also have to train your gut to like take in that many carbs like in such a short amount of time, such a concentrated amount.
Yeah.
But yeah, typically it's like on straightaways or if there's any sort of like lull in the group. I also look at like who's drinking sometimes. So if there's like key players that I see are drinking, then I'll take a drink because that either means that they're just fueling and I can take a rest because I know that they're not going to be attacking while they're fueling, or they're fueling for an attack and I want to be ready for that. And so, you know, sometimes it's good to like take that in when you see the key players doing it so that you can be like, okay, I need to like watch this guy because he may go.
Geez, there's so much strategy behind this. Like, you don't do anything without like it is chest. That's insane.
Yeah. And again, like that's the whole like thing with like the Zwift fitness. It's like, it doesn't matter how strong you are. If you can't, stay with the pace, then you're not going to be able to keep up. Like it really comes down to like, can you handle your bike? Can you keep up? Like fitness is definitely important. But also like, what kind of strategy do you have? Like, again, there's some people who are just like ready to go for it, and you can make them just work for you the whole time. And then at the end come around them and they're blasted and they don't know why. And it's like, well, you sat on the front the whole time and took wind for everybody. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that. Like, I mean, even sometimes, especially as a sprinter, I'm not very good at like just staying at my threshold power. I'm really good at like repeated spikes in power. And so even in breakaways, like when I get to the front and everybody's drafting off of me, I'll do what we call soft pedaling, which is basically like I make it look like I'm pedaling really hard. But if you look down, I'm actually like going at my endurance pace. Like that's the pace that I could do for 8 hours.
Forever.
Yeah. And I just like get really aero so that I'm kind of like taking a little less wind, and I pedal as little as possible to make them think I'm working, but I'm not actually working.
So there's strategy even in your body language and how you are like communicating with the players around you.
Yeah, totally. Like even just like throwing attacks. Sometimes even if you're tired, you want to like throw an attack so that people think that you're not tired. Or like sometimes doing an attack to see if everybody else is feeling tired. Like there's a lot of gauging the people around you to try and see like, how are they feeling? How do they think I'm feeling? What can I do here? Like there's been times where I just pretend like I'm really tired and I'm actually not. And I actually did this at the state championship last year. Like coming into the last few laps, I kind of just like let my body language just hang there and let people kind of forget about me. And that put me in a really good position for that.
To just like use that sprinter power and pull ahead.
Yeah.
So for you, like when you're nearing the last laps of the race, at what point do you turn on your gas, I guess? Or it probably depends on the field.
Yeah, it depends on the field. It depends on the course and kind of what's happening. I mean, typically as a sprinter, like you're trying to go as late as possible because you know that you have the power and the speed to like get around people. And so for me, like coming into the last few laps or the last lap, I'm really focused on like that last straight and the last corner and where my position is coming into the last corner. There's some people who say like first to the corner wins. I think that sometimes works. But again, it just kind of depends on the course. Like last year, the state championship course lent itself really well to being fourth wheel coming into like the second to last corner. Because it was a lot longer than it felt, that last straight. And so people would, come into that second corner, come into the last corner, and it was this really tight. It was basically like one corner is almost what it felt like. And then people would hit it right there. But really you had to kind of hit it a little bit later because it was also uphill a little bit. And so again, it's just like understanding those course features of like where you need to go and where you need to not go. Last year at the Salt Lake Crit, day 2 was at Sugar House, and there's kind of that like big hill coming up into the finish. And a lot of people wanted to wait for like halfway up that hill because it was a hill versus when you're coming into it, you're going, like over 40 miles an hour because there's a hill that comes down. So you come into the dip. And so I just used that momentum to come around everybody, and I was able to keep up that like 40 miles an hour versus everybody slowed down to 30 and then was trying to like get up. And so
and so you did really well at the Salt Lake Crit, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about that. How many days of racing?
So it's 2 days.
2 days.
Yeah. The first day was at Industry, which is like, I don't know, kind of this cool like multi-event space. I don't really know, honestly. They have like co-working there and
there's like, I
bunch
watched
of other
the video.
stuff.
There's like a bridge you guys went under, right?
No, so that
Walking
was
bridge?
that was actually the year at Gateway. So that was
okay.
in 2022.
Oh, okay. So it was a year before.
So that was before, yeah. Or maybe I think that was actually 2021.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't really have my facts straight on that,
Like
if I'm being honest.
year.
Yeah.
Not your year. We're talking about your year.
Yeah. But yeah, industry, it was a 4-corner crit, and it goes around industry. It's like over by the Evo campus, if you know where that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a street or two over from the Evo campus. And so that was day 1, 4-corner crit. And then the second day was at Sugar House, just going around Sugar House Park on the like road, which is like kind of debatable on if that's a crit or not. Again, it was like a little bit long for a crit. The corners aren't very hard, kind of a thing. And so that one's kind of a really interesting race. But yeah, so I ended up doing pretty well at them. The first day I took 3rd, and then the second day I took 2nd, which I was really angry about both of those. They were kind of mistakes that I made that like got me there.
So first day, what was your mistake? If you could go back in time, what are you changing?
First day I almost set myself into a barrier coming into the last corner.
Just because you were too excited, or what?
I was just like way too hyped. Yeah, because I knew that I had it. Like in my mind, I was like, I know for sure that I can out sprint these guys.
So annoying.
And so, because that was the race that I was in a breakaway. So there was 5 of us in a breakaway. There were 2 guys that were doing a lot of work. And so I knew they would be cooked coming into the last bit. There was one other guy who like, he's really strong, but he's not a sprinter. And then there was another guy who is a sprinter, but I knew I could out sprint him. And so coming into like the second to last lap, we ended up dropping the 2 guys that were doing a lot of work because they were just cooked by then. And then coming into the last corner, I was 3rd wheel, so I was in really good position. The guy who I guess you'd consider more of a sprinter, he was actually in the front, so he's taking all the wind. So I'm like, okay, he's working really hard. I can draft off and come around him. And yeah, I just got too eager. I hit a little bit of a dip in the road, and I just remember like looking at the barrier, my eyes got super wide, and I was like, and I'm going like 33 miles an hour at that point. And really at that point I was just like, don't crash. So I grabbed a handful of brakes. Those guys took off. I started closing the gap, but it was gone at that point. Like I was all the way back down to like 22 miles an hour at that point, and there's just no way I was going to make up that. I mean, I gave it a good effort, but
and you got 3rd.
Didn't
That's
quite get up. Yeah,
awesome.
No, it was super cool, and that was my first podium too.
Which
was really special.
So good.
Yeah, it was cool. I think it's hard, like as a competitor, it's really hard to be happy with being on the bottom steps, because you're just like, especially when you know that you could have had it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of something that I struggle with, is like being happy with what the result was and like in how I raced. And, I raced that race really well. And if it weren't for that one mistake, I'm sure I would have won. But it did feel really cool to like get that opportunity to like hop up on the step, especially at the Salt Lake Crit. It's a national level crit. I mean, there are people from all over the nation racing, even in the Cat 4 field. And so that was really cool, and that was really special. And I think that like in my mind gave me a lot of confidence that I was really needing to be like, okay, this is something that I can definitely go and get.
We're excited to announce our first podcast sponsor, Creatures of Habit. They have a great overnight oat product called Meal One. There's a ton of different flavors, and each flavor has just about 30 grams of plant-based protein. You put it in the fridge the night before, take it out the morning of, and you have a nice balanced breakfast to fuel you for your workout. If you use our code STORER at creaturesofhabit.com, you get 10% off. This episode is brought to you by Coach Soak. Coach Soak's mission is to help athletes by providing products to help them in their recovery. Their products are derived from natural ingredients and incorporate things like magnesium flakes, sea salts, and essential oils. Use our code in the description for 10% off. I feel like that type of mindset, though, is like what makes an athlete an athlete.
Yeah.
It's like you are hungry for more.
Yeah.
And that will drive you in your next like performance and you're next and you're next.
Yeah.
But the next day you went on to take second. So tell me about the Sugar House day.
Yeah. So Sugar House was like kind of interesting. Again, being like kind of a bigger guy in cycling, hills are not my friend. And that one has kind of like two main features. It has the main hill that comes up to the start finish. And then you also have like this smaller kind of like S hill over on the far end. That is a lot harder than it seems like it would be. It's like not super steep or anything, but it really kind of comes at you quick. And so I was like pretty cooked that day. I was just staying in the pack as much as I could. There were a couple people that tried to go for breaks. I didn't even try to chase it down. Like I just sat back and I was like, if this, if this works out, then it works out. If not, like, oh well, I had fun. Like I was not gonna really try. I was gonna try for the end, but I wasn't gonna try to bring anybody back. And then coming into, I think it was like 3 laps to go, maybe 4 laps to go, there's actually a really big crash that happened that I barely sneaked away from.
That's scary. That is scary.
And it was like, it's really easy to like blame yourself from crashes. It wasn't my fault, but it felt like it was my fault. We're kind of coming into, again, one of those weird like chicanes. And so all of a sudden the road kind of goes this way for a sec and then it goes like that.
Yeah.
And I was headed straight for the gutter. I kept my line. As a person who's riding behind, you have to make sure that you're paying attention to the person in front of you and what they're doing. And so there was a guy who was like trying to kind of bomb me on the inside next to the gutter, but I was headed straight for the gutter. Yeah. So I kept my line. I had somebody right next to me and I was like, if I try to move over, like we're all going down. He ended up grabbing a handful of brakes. I don't really know exactly what happened. I don't know if like the crash happened from him or somebody else who reacted to him, but there's a pretty big crash. Everybody walked away from it okay, so it wasn't like too bad. But that really split up the field and caused things to get really dynamic. Everybody started accelerating at that point because they knew like, hey, the field's smaller. Now we all have a little bit more of a chance. Yeah. And so those last like few laps were really fast and really dynamic. Coming into the last lap, you kind of come around, I guess that would be like the east side, and you're coming down into the dip kind of by the lake, and then you're coming up that final hill. And coming into it, I was actually like 10 or 15 wheels back, but kind of like I was saying, a lot of people wanted to go in the middle of that hill because they were just like afraid to have to try to get all the way up the hill. I knew that everybody was going to do that because everybody had kind of been doing that all race, and I'd been experimenting earlier on in the race with carrying a lot of speed into that hill. So throughout the race, I would like actually kind of hit it at the bottom of the hill and then let my speed carry me up the hill, and I would pass a bunch of people, and then everybody would like come back up to me and I'd fall back into the wheels. So I kind of knew that that was like a good way to go about it. So we get to the bottom of the hill and I just start like sprinting my heart out. It was like one of the longest sprints of my life. I ended up passing, 10, 12 guys, however many people it was. I thought I was in first and I looked up the hill and somebody had actually already gone early. He was trying to lead out his buddy, which I guess we should explain lead outs too.
Yeah, let's explain lead outs.
Again, more jargon. So a lead out is basically just when you are taking wind for your teammate. And so you're riding at a fast pace, fast enough that nobody can come around you, but slow enough that your teammate can kind of stay in your draft. That's like the big thing with lead out. If you watch like the World Tour or even pro crit racing, you'll see a lot of lead out trains. So you'll have 4 or 5 guys stacked, and they're stacked up for their sprinter typically. Oh, wow. And so as they're going, like the first guy is just kind of gutting himself and then he pulls off. And then the next person guts themselves and they pull off. The next person guts themselves and they pull off. And then at the end, you have like one last lead out person who's just pushing it as hard as they can. And then the sprinter has enough power to come around that person. So typically your second to last lead out person is actually doing a full sprint. but the sprinter has enough to like get around him. So this guy was actually trying to lead out his buddy, and his buddy just like didn't have it in him. So he dropped, and next thing he knows, he's just like at the top of the hill.
I guess I'm sprinting this.
And so, anyway, I came flying like a bat out of hell at him and like barely missed it. He like posted up for the win. Like there's this photo again, like super happy I got second. But there's this photo and you can see it, and he's like this, and I'm like in the back just like grinned out, and I was so pissed.
That's awesome.
But it was cool. It was a cool experience again to like be at my first national level crit and be able to podium both days was like really special. And again, it just like fueled the fire of like, now I know I can do it. And also I don't want to be on the bottom step again. And so that was kind of like leading into the state championships. I was like, I can't be on the bottom step again.
So how did the state champs go for you?
I mean, good. I won.
Like first.
Yeah. No, the state crit was really cool. I came into it with a lot of confidence. I just kind of like felt it in my bones. I was feeling really good. Training was going well. After Salt Lake crit, we didn't really know when state was going to happen. And so I actually kind of took a little bit of time off, which was really good for my body to just kind of like recover. Before that, I'd been just like going after it really hard. And so I got back into training that allowed me to reset and start feeling really good. And coming into state, I felt better than I had all year long. And the state course actually lent itself really well to me. It was a 4-corner crit. It was really tight, so it's kind of what we refer to as hot dog style, which is basically just where the two end corners are so tight that they almost become one corner.
Oh, wow.
And so instead of like coming around and then you're going straight for a minute and then you're turning again, you're kind of just doing this one continuous turn that has like a bit of a straight in the middle of it.
Oh, cool.
And it was also like had a little bit of a hill in it. Like it was really, really small and really gradual, but I don't think a lot of people paid attention to the fact that like there was a hill there. And I knew it was going to be really punchy, which I liked. It would be hard to get away and stay away because of the punchy nature of it. And so I knew that those like spikes in energy would be really good for me. So coming into it, had load of confidence, was feeling really good. I'd kind of just like manifested in my mind that I'd won already. And so I was just like kind of playing through like how I was going to do it. And again, like that was another race where I actually raced it like fairly passive and just paid attention to the group, who was doing what, and where I needed to be. And same thing from actually one of the guys who was really working at the Salt Lake crit. I knew that he would kind of do the same thing. And so I was like playing the field in a way where I'd like come to the front, kind of soft pedal, let them come up and start to really pull it. And so the pace was like just absolutely perfect for me. And then coming into the last 2 corners, because it's kind of like one-ish, but it's really 2 corners. I was like 4 wheels back, which I knew was a really good position for me. There wasn't really anybody in that race who I knew could out sprint me. And coming into the like out of that last corner, everybody started to really hit it. And I just kind of like came around the side and nobody really knew I was there, and, came up and, ended up taking first. And I don't know, that was like a really cool moment for me. And I think that was like, I'd already fallen in love with the sport, but I think being able to do that, even though it was just Cat 4, like training all year, getting ready, getting myself to that point, like mentally and physically, and then being able to like execute on that. And that was kind of like the goal for the year, was like, oh, I want to like win state. That would be really cool. It was really special to like bring that win home.
Yeah, and to go from like you bought a bike and got a trainer just to like lose weight and to like maybe have fun, and then to turn that goal into like, oh, I think I can win state, is like had to have felt so empowering. And like That's what I love about sport, is that like you can play to your strengths and find just something that feels just magic to you.
Yeah,
you know?
totally. And I think like after high school, because like I grew up doing track and field. I started when I was in like third grade. And while football was kind of like my main thing, and I was really thinking I was going to play D1, track was kind of like the second thing. I ended up getting injured in football, decided to just stop and focus on track. I started running for a club called Gold Medal Athletics. They produce like some of the fastest kids in the state every year. And I was like feeling really good.
What was your event in track?
I did 1, 2, 4 and jumps. So I did long jump and high jump. And then like
range
relays. So it was kind of all over. I would not consider myself a 400 runner. I was like a 1-2 runner.
Okay.
But every once in a while my coach was like, hey, you need to do the 4 kind of a thing.
You're like, fine.
And so, you know, like coming into senior year, I was running with GMA. I had made a lot of progress in that too. We had the fastest kid in the state on our team, and he, like, when I first started with gold medal, I was like the lower group of everybody was really fast.
Yeah.
But I was like kind of in the lower group, and by the time the season actually came around, I was like kind of like running with like the faster guys, and even the fastest guy in the state. It was like there were like some days where I was like kind of keeping up with him in training, so I was feeling really good. And I ended up tearing my hamstring in the first meet in the 60-meter dash, and like it kind of destroyed my entire like track career, and I couldn't really continue on.
Like you tore it completely?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
No, it was pretty terrible. I kind of came back and I ran that year not well. Like, you know, I had a sleeve that I had to wear and I just couldn't really push it. I was also kind of afraid to push it. Like there's a certain trauma that kind of happens with injuries where you're like, you just don't really want to try it again.
It's almost like your body won't let you kind of. Yeah.
No, totally. Like I lost all of that speed that I had built up, not actually physically because I was in great shape physically, but like mentally I just couldn't get it back. And that kind of sent me into like a dark spiral of just like kind of feeling bad about myself, because leading up to that, you know, growing up, I was like the athletic kid and everyone was like, he's going to like do something at athletics. He's going to go and, you know, play pro ball or run or something like that. Like there's a lot of people pulling for me. You know, like even my freshman year, I was actually All-American in football. And so I went and played in the All-American Bowl. And so I had like this trajectory where like sports is kind of my life. And as soon as like that got taken away from me, I didn't really know who I was anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think like now coming full circle, I was able to find like, I don't know, like a lot of self-love in that like in-between time of like being okay with myself and being okay with the fact that I wasn't like quote unquote an athlete anymore. But now being able to like get that part of me back and be like, okay, now I'm actually like doing this and I'm doing it at like a decently high level and I'm moving quickly in it. That was like really special. And I think now I've built like that good base of like, I'm really secure in like myself, but I also get to have that bit of like athletics in me too.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if crit is considered like an endurance sport. It's an hour.
Yeah, I would
so
say
that's
so.
long. But what I like about endurance sport is that like, I mean, you said you trained for this for a year. Like that's a lot of hard work that you put into crit racing. But in reality, in like the grand scheme of your crit career, that's nothing, right? Yeah. So to excel like that quickly in a year is to me really impressive. Yeah. But also I think that like all of the experiences that you had leading up to that have allowed you to like be the endurance athlete that you are.
Yeah, totally.
And yeah, there's just so many like levels to this type of sport, and that's why it's just so interesting.
Yeah. Well, and even like from a training perspective, yeah, we race for like an hour or less sometimes, but like I'm still going out and putting in 2, 3, 4 hour days where I'm on the bike and like really building up that base fitness. And like I think the mental fortitude that you get from being able to go out for hours on end and like push yourself really hard, it's something that like I never really got to experience in anything else that I did. Because even in track, like I was a sprinter. Yeah, we would do intervals. Yeah, they sucked. Yeah, I would throw up like midway through. But it was like, you know, done within an hour.
Maybe
and like
90 minutes.
yeah, and like part of that was like warming up. So it wasn't even like the full time. And then like football, same thing. It's like, yeah, you have long practices, but there's kind of like breaks in between. And so cycling was like very unique for me to get into it. And I remember like the first time I got on a bike, I guess the first time I got on like my road bike on the trainer, I think I lasted maybe 25 minutes. Like I was dead after a while. But like building up that ability to like ride for a long time and like be kind of like people talk about like the hurt locker, like being able to like just sit in that and like sit in the dark, I think is actually like, it's kind of meditative, honestly. And it's like a really cool thing to experience.
It's a good feeling, especially afterward. It's like almost an empty, like you sweat it out almost, but emotionally kind of. I don't even know.
No, totally. Like there's so many days where, and again, like I'm not much of a gym person. I don't really like going to the gym. Like I'm starting to like it more now because I'm doing it specifically for cycling. But I just like, I couldn't really like do the whole gym thing and all of that, but like cycling has given me this therapeutic escape in so many ways where I can come home and, you know, if I like had a long day or, you know, had whatever happened with a client or somebody said something, or even like I'm just feeling off, I feel like I can always turn to the bike to like be able to bring myself back to zero and just like reset. Cause like, yeah, I go out and I train really hard, but there's also days where I'm like, I need to take care of myself and I'll just go for just like a ride, like just to do it. You know, even the other day I was like just riding around looking at houses. Like I love architecture and interior design, and you know, being a graphic designer, I appreciate design. And so I literally went on a ride just to go look at cool houses. And I like went up and was looking at all these big, cool modern houses. And like, I think that the ability to do that and like get a workout is really unique, at least in everything else that I've tried.
Yeah. And you need like those workouts that are fun, that are literally like, of course you're getting your cardio in, but like you need something that's just for you sometimes in the sport to keep you engaged, to keep you in love with it, and to like promote longevity. Because in reality, right, like you want to be the best at what you do. That's why we wanted you on the podcast. So you'll be in this for a long time. So I think that too is important for listeners to know that like you are very good at what you do, but still there's like rides that are just fun.
Chill. Yeah. And it's like, it's really cool. You know, one of the local guys around here, his name is Dirk. I don't know how old he is. Sorry, Dirk. But, you know, he's like this older dude who still goes out and rides for like 4 hours. And I don't know, like I've gotten the chance to be around him a lot more recently. And I think that it's really cool to see somebody who's like in their older years still loving it, still going out, still doing it. And it's like there's not that many sports where you can get to old age and like keep doing it. And so, you know, through one of the events that we're running this year, I guess the series that we're running this year, I got really close to him, and that's been like also really motivating. I think that last year was very focused on like, I need to win and I need to do all of this, and like the competitor spirit in me. But I think I also learned how to like back it off and just be like, I also need to do this for fun because again, it's underfunded. I know that it's not going to like pay my bills. It's just something that I'm doing for fun, and I really want to like keep it that way and build that longevity.
So this project that you're doing, you're building a team, right?
So we're doing a crit league.
A crit league. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. Just kind of, for anyone interested.
Yeah, totally. So last year there was a series that that, like, for the interest of this, I won't really name,
Mm.
but it didn't have the ability to have like USAC points, so you couldn't
Okay.
get upgrade points. So again, going back to like that whole category thing, I'm trying to get to Cat 1 so that I can race at the like quote unquote pro level. They weren't USAC sanctioned. They were also like kind of dangerous courses. There was one course where we had a guy separate his shoulder, another one of our guys broke his collarbone. There was like another handful of crashes, broken bikes. Somebody else separated their shoulder. Like there are all of these like crashes.
Because they're not planned well. The turns are too tight, or what?
Yeah,
makes
it was
dangerous?
like the turns were too tight. The asphalt was really slick. It was a new venue that they were trying. It was actually in the Draper DLD parking lot, and it just it's really slick asphalt. It has these weird elevation changes that make it kind of dangerous. You pick up speed really fast in spots where you really shouldn't have speed. There's also like this drive-through that it ran through that had these 3 pillars. Like it was kind of insane. And so anyway, like after that race where everybody kind of crashed out, I pulled away from it and was like, you know what, I'm not doing this. Like I got bills to pay. I don't need to be doing this. And all year long, I was just kind of like longing for the ability to race crits. And really my only opportunity last year to race crits was there's a crit in Ogden, the Salt Lake crit both days, and state. So those are the 4 crits I did last year, actually. And so when it came around this year, a group of us from LHM were talking. We're like, you know, we should like put together a crit league and do it the right way. And so actually next week is going to be our first race of the Utah Crit League. And we've invited like all of the teams around Utah to come and ride. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but we have a good amount of people who are signed up. I think we'll have on average fields of like 30 to 40 people, which is actually really good for like a local race. Some of those bigger races will get like 100 people, but to have that many people signed up is really cool. And so right now we have 3 different venues that we're going to be running. There's one at the Real Salt Lake Stadium, and it goes kind of like up and around the stadium, and then it comes back and it goes through the parking lot, and then it goes back up the other side and then comes back. So there's like kind of these 2 hills on both sides, which is a really cool feature, and 180 turns. So it's going to be a very interesting kind of dynamic race.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which we haven't really had around here. Like there haven't really been any courses that are that dynamic. We have another course at the Real Training Center in Harriman, which will come like kind of out onto the road. It's a little more traditional. It's kind of like an L shape. And then we have another one that is over by the dealerships in Draper off of 123rd, I think.
Oh, cool.
And that one will go around one of the financial buildings right there. And that's just like a 4-corner crit. And our biggest thing was like we wanted to create a crit league that was safe, that was fun, that educated people on like how to race crits and making it very accessible. So we have like even things like any women or juniors that race 5 or more races in the series, they actually get a refund back. Cool. So they get like $75 back on their registration. It's all USAC sanctioned, so you can upgrade every single race. It starts next week and it goes for 12 different races, and it's every single week. So it's a weekly opportunity to upgrade and get some points. And it's going to be cool. There's going to be some like local pros there. Empire, they're kind of connected to our club. They'll be racing in it a lot. And yeah, there's some really fast people who are going to be there. It's going to be pretty fun. We'll have, you know, different clinics that we'll run for anybody who's interested in crit. It's going to be really fun for like spectators to come and just like watch it. And it's going to be like kind of legit. Like we've never really had that before. It's just like, oh, we have like this truck with a camera and like we just like put out some tape on the ground and like that's the start finish line. But it's like we're bringing hay bales. We're going to like block stuff off. We're going to have a whole van with like DJ setup, an announcer, and, you know, we'll have all the USAC officials there. So it'll feel like really kind of big time. And that's the scene that they have in Southern California. Again, going back to like Justin Williams, like all of those guys have developed that atmosphere. in Southern California, and we want to bring that here and kind of like rival what they're doing. There's a lot of really good crit racers that come out of Southern California because they have, 1 to 3 weekly races that they can do sometimes, and they can get upgrade points in that. So you see a lot of Cat 1s coming out of California, and we want to kind of be like the next state that people look at for developing the best crit talent in the nation, really, and even the world too.
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of cyclists in Utah as well. So I think it's like a great spot to like start building it, and it's very cool.
Yeah.
If our listeners want to like learn more or come watch or even like participate, is there an Instagram, a website? Like where should they look?
So you can find us on Instagram at Utah Crit League or utahcritleague.com.
Okay, we'll link that.
Yeah. So it's pretty easy, but we'll be posting stuff on there quite often. That's another thing with promoting that we're really trying to do. I've been running a lot of the marketing on it and having like a newsletter, a website that's updated. We're going to have like results on the website, so it'll be really easy to follow. We'll have recap videos so you know where everybody's standing. And we'll have posts coming out all the time. We have a bunch of really cool incentives. We're giving away a bike frame this year for the winner in every category. So Ventum, shout out Ventum. They're one of our sponsors. We'll be giving away bike frames, sunglasses, a bunch of other stuff. And yeah, we have some really cool sponsors on board. Zane, Corey, and Dirk have done a really good job of like putting it together. I've kind of just like made it look pretty. But yeah, I'm really excited. So yeah, you can find us at Utah Crit League or utahcritleague.com.
Yeah, I want to come watch one. It sounds like the videos that I've seen, it looks like fun to be in the crowd on the side. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's super fun. We're trying to work and see if we can get like food trucks out there and stuff. Like really, I think that crit is unique in the way that it's a very spectator centric sport. I don't think a lot of race promoters have done a good job of making that known. People kind of accidentally see crits. They're just like, why is there a bike race going on in downtown? And they just like walk over and start watching. But it's a great spectator sport. You're seeing people come around every minute. It's really dynamic. It's a fun atmosphere. There's music playing, depending on which one you go to. Sometimes they have like beer gardens and it's by restaurants, and you can kind of like support the local businesses and watch the races.
Yeah, that's cool.
So it's a really cool atmosphere, and that's like, obviously it's our first year, so we'll kind of see like how things go, but that's really what we're trying to do. And like, even if you don't want to come race, like just come out and watch it. It's really fun. They're going to be like Tuesday nights at 5:30. It's really easy to just like pop by on your way home from work. Yeah. It's like, if you're in the area, just pop by, see what's going on. We keep our schedule updated on our website so you can see, which one you're close to, and come watch it. Like it's a blast. I love it. I love watching and racing, and it's pretty cool, and even too, like, I feel like we talked about the chaotic side of crit racing, but there is this like really accessible side too. Like if you watch the Masters race, which is like 35 plus, and then you have 40 plus and even like 50 and 60 plus sometimes in the bigger crits. Like those guys are still going for it, but they also like know that they need to like chill out. And so there's like also this level of like, it's fun and it's like, it's dynamic, but there's also a very accessible area of the sport for other people who like don't want to throw elbows and shove each other into barriers, like
risk the broken collarbone.
Yeah, risk it all. Like there's still that level of the sport that I think is really cool. And we're really trying to develop the junior program as well and get some youngins into it.
Yeah. I'm excited to like come watch more stuff. I hadn't heard of it before like talking with you.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to just like learn more about it.
Yeah. It's super fun.
I like our guests to leave the listeners with one actionable thing. So kind of like you looked to like big names in cycling that inspired you to like, I think I inspired you to get into cycling because you felt like you might have a place there. What would you give someone who's listening, who looks up to you? Like what advice would you give them?
I would say this might be a little cliche, but like, don't let other people tell you you can't do it. And that includes yourself. You know, for a long time, there were a lot of things in my life that I told myself I couldn't do. Again, because I didn't see people that looked like me, or, you know, I had whatever thoughts in my head that told me I wasn't good enough or whatever. And that inner dialogue is really, really strong. And like, yeah, sometimes you can, you know, put it to the side when other people are like, oh, you can't do this. And you're like, oh, whatever, man. But like, when it's yourself, that's a really strong voice. And so just like, don't let anybody tell you you can't do it, including yourself. You know, if you want something, go for it. Like, you know, I think that cycling has given me a vehicle to like look really deep into myself, and learn a lot about myself. And I feel like the past year has been pretty transformative. Like I've had a lot of good, I've had a lot of bad, a lot of ups and downs. And, you know, cycling was one of those things that I told myself I could never do. And now looking back at it, it's like the glue that held me together all year. And yeah, I don't know. I'm like really grateful that I actually did take that jump and that I didn't listen to myself and kind of just like did it because I knew I wanted to.
Yeah, that's so important, because I feel like when you think of people telling you you can't do something, like I often forget to like think of myself in that aspect as well, because everyone can get caught in that like negative spiral.
Yeah, I think that's major. Like, I was listening to a book recently, Manifest by Roxy Nafusi. It's a great book.
Write it down.
But she talks about like your subconscious, and I can't remember the exact numbers that she uses, but it's like the majority of your life is run by your subconscious, not even your conscious mind. And your subconscious is really strong. And if you continue to like feed it negativity and, you know, just like bad things, it's going to create that type of life. And so I think like learning how to like look inward and change that subconscious narrative is really big. And it's hard. Like it's, you know, easier said than done. But I think that constantly reminding ourselves that we need to like give ourselves grace and be nice to ourselves and, you know, work for the things that we want to, like, you're unstoppable at that point if you can just focus on that.
Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.